Welcome to the Rainbow Studio. This is part of the Iowa blog, and I'm your host, Greg Wen. We are continuing our review of the 89th Mizmor, called a Psalm, which is probably the most extraordinary piece of literature in history of this planet. The lyricist, songwriter in this case, was none other than God himself. The subject was his beloved son, and that would be Dode, who the world knows as David, who was the former and returning king of Israel. He is the Messiah. He is the Son of God, and he is our Savior. He is the chosen one. Know all about him, because it is only through recognizing what Yahweh saw in Dode and chose to achieve through Dode that life has meaning. Literally, life without an understanding and appreciation for, even capitalizing upon, what Yahweh, who's God's one and only name, accomplished through Dode, God's one and only begotten Son, is the essence of life. It is why we were created. It is the means to extend our lives. His is the most extraordinary life in all of human history. And so it's essential that we know what God had to say about his Son. And when we study these things, the most obvious result is that God obliterates Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They all exist on the basis of robbing Jews and robbing the most Yehud of all. Literally counterfeiting God's Son as a product of identity theft to create their false messiahs. And God is so disgusted about it. He says that the basis of Christianity, which is to rob Dode of his titles and achievements, and Judaism, which was formed on the basis of the false messiah Bar Kokhba, which Israel gets its star, and Islam, the braggadocious death cult conceived by Muhammad when he positioned himself as the Messiah, as he was run out of Kaabaville in shame, are so egregious relative to what they have stolen from God that God says they are all calling me a liar. So not only don't we all worship the same God, the God of religion is despised by the one actual God. Speaking of his beloved Son, the Messiah and King, Dode. And now, mind you, this was written 4 years after the conclusion of Dode's first of 3 lives. He said, his offspring and that which he sows, his descendants and posterity, his family, and the seed which he promulgates by having planted, growing for the harvest, will exist and will endure, have been, are, and will always be forever, eternal, throughout time. And his place of honor, his dignity and authority, as well as his throne, his seat of sovereign leadership and power, will be as brilliant as the sun before me. Mizmor 89:36. This is particularly important for something that will be repeated here in just a moment. And that is it takes our attention back to the greater and lesser luminaries of the fourth day of creation. But let me read to you one statement further so that we can make this comparison, because it is amongst the most insightful, enlightening, uplifting, and empowering prophetic statements ever made. And it's in the most otherwise troubling part of the creation account. So, saying of his beloved son, of Dode's seat of honor, his position of authority, his sovereign leadership, his throne, is going to be, and will always be, this was written in the imperfect, as brilliant as the sun, Hashemek, as sunlight before me. And this is Neged Ani. This is as my conspicuous counterpart in my presence. Even Neged is telling. Likened unto and according to, comparable to the moon, Yerash. He will be affirmed and established. He will be appointed and prepared, trusted, and set in place forevermore. Throughout all time, serving as a enduring and reliable, truthful and dependable, restoring witness, an informative source of eternal testimony. Throughout space-time in the heavens. Pause now and contemplate what you have just heard. There is a statement, excuse me just one second. There's a statement in Bereshith Genesis. As Yahweh is going through the 6 days of creation, that is the number one place that critics of God or religion go when trying to disprove them. And there are two aspects of the creation account that are difficult for people to fathom. I have solved both of them, and at this point, I'm going to mention one and focus on the other. The first is that God said that he created the spiritual and the physical world in 6 days. And of course, we know that the Earth is somewhere between 14 and 15 billion years, not the Earth, the universe is somewhere between 14 and 15 billion years old. We would have, or many would have thought the 13.8 was accurate until, well, I pointed out that they chose the wrong figure for quark confinement, which is when energy is cooled to the point that matter, it can coalesce into matter. And that is important because prior to energy becoming matter, time simply exists. It does not move. And so you cannot measure a duration of time until there is matter, because prior to matter, time simply is. Do you understand that? Okay, I hope so. Second, the Webb telescope has shown that Methuselah, the star that is some 15 billion years old and therefore older than the 13.8 billion year age of the universe, is not an anomaly. That there are now galaxies that are fully formed going back to and past 13.8 billion years. Therefore, the universe existed prior to that time. And that's only based upon what we can see, because the universe is moving away from itself everywhere simultaneously. And what we have found is that there wasn't one Big Bang, there were many Big Bangs simultaneously. And that because of that, and because the movement, the stretching of space is such that it is moving now faster than the speed of light, then what that is telling us is that beyond what they have seen, there is a very likelihood of much more. We just can't see it because the light can't make its way to us, because the space between us is stretching faster than the light can travel. Therefore, the universe is probably in the range of 15 billion years old. When one does the math based upon the cosmic background radiation from the Big Bang, which we can measure, and Big Bang is a term that Yahweh actually invented in his creation account. He calls it a Big Bang. What we find is that time was stretched 10 to the 12th power. What that means is that Einstein's theory, which has been proven to be factually accurate, is that time is relative to the observer. And in the presence of great velocity or great mass, time slows. Well, there could not have been greater mass or velocity than at this moment of the creation of the universe, particularly by a being that would have been in proximity to the creation of the universe. And therefore, time measured from creation has to be at the point of creation, and it cannot be measured from a planet that would not come into existence for another 10 billion years. Time as we know it is measured based upon the size and speed of the Earth, which is, minuscule. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny part of our solar system, which is an infinitesimally tiny part of the 200 to 400 billion stars within our galaxy, which is a tiny part of the 2 trillion overall galaxies that we've been able to see. So we measure time based upon this little rock called Earth. But what the cosmic radiation from the background of the Big Bang shows is that time was slowed by 10 to the 12th power at the moment of universal conception. And so if you were to take, and I have done this, the 15 billion years since the universe was created, and you divide that amount of time by 10 to the 12th power, you get 6 24-hour days.
Yeah.
So God's presentation of 6 24-hour days is precisely accurate, since he is telling the story of creation as the creator from the point of creation. It transpired in exactly 6 24-hour days, which is exactly 15 billion years from our perspective, looking back on time, measuring time here on this rock we call Earth. So that's the hardest part that the casual reader would not understand, that we can now resolve. The second is that plant life was created on the third day. And if you use the natural spiral of galaxies or nautilus shells, that sort of thing, where you get this expanding of the circle or arc from something, what you find is that the amount of time between things actually expands as you go out. And if you take the realization that plant life was created in this third epoch, and if you go to yadayah.com and read the first volume called Beginning of the Yada Yada series, you'll see all this spelled out for you, and it gives you the exact moment in time looking back. But it is a precise an accurate rendering of when plant life first emerged on this planet, and it says that it came forth initially from the seas. And that it was that plant life that transformed carbon dioxide from all of the volcanic eruptions into oxygen, such that the air finally became translucent enough over time with the proliferation of plant life in the sea and on the land for the greater and lesser luminaries, the sun and moon, to be seen. And so the very simplest view of the fourth day is that there would be a sun and a moon on this planet that would become visible in the fourth day. And that is true. And then animal life was created on the fifth day. And when you look at back at the Cambrian explosion, all 25 varieties of animals that we know today all came into existence at the same time. There is microevolution, no macroevolution, in other words. Therefore, the story is completely correct if you just look at the fact that the sun and the moon became visible on that fourth day. Because God doesn't say that he created them on the fourth day. He just said they became signs, which means they became visible. That's a very simplistic way, although accurate way, to look at God's testimony regarding the fourth day of creation. But there's something vastly more powerful that doesn't become apparent until one comes to realize the position that Dode takes in God's story. Once you realize that Dode is the beginning and the end, he is the basis of the covenant. He is the means to our salvation. He is God's chosen implement. He is the man God loved more than any of us by a huge margin, and the one through whom God accomplished the most. Dode is the identity of the person spoken of in Devarim 18, when Moshe says that God's going to provide out of you one like me. And he goes on to articulate the unique qualifications of Dode. In this statement, we have affirmation that Dode's position with God is to be equated with the sun. By using Keseh in association with Dode, Yahweh is stating very succinctly in this ode to his beloved son, Dode, that we should look at Dode's position of authority and power and influence in conjunction with Yahweh as the sun. Therefore, Dode is the greater luminary of the fourth day of creation, who serves as a sign of the Moed. The Moed are the restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony that play out over 7 appointments. The first 3 Dode fulfilled. The first 3 enable the benefits of the covenant. The universe and life exist expressly for the covenant. That's why this is such a big deal. Pesach, Matzah, and Bokorim. Those are the first 3 Moed Mikre. Dode fulfilled them. And therefore, he is the ultimate sign of the Moed. And as the greater luminary, he is the most enlightening individual. And as light is both something that is eternal, something that is exceedingly empowering and enabling, and versus mortal bodies, that Dode is like God when God said that he was akin to light. Dode is the greater luminary. But this doesn't just say that. It follows that statement with a reference to the moon. And when we go back just two statements from what I've shared with you here, what you find is Dode, or Yahweh, introducing the restoring witness that serves to reacquaint the world with all that Dode represents. Well, that restoring witness, which is, again, the basis of Moed. It means to ponder the implications of the restoring witness. Must be likened to, must be according to, is in the manner of the moon. What does the moon do?
Reflects the light of the sun.
Simple. The moon reflects the light of the sun. When? In the darkest hours. And we are in very dark times from the moment that Dode fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, Makodim. To this day, it has been exceedingly dark. And until quite recently, when the appointed lesser luminary of the fourth day of creation began to reflect the sun's brilliance, there was no end to the darkness. The only end to the darkness for humanity, and particularly this final remnant of Yisrael, to have the opportunity to see the greater luminary and to see this magnificent Son of God as our King return with Yahweh, is to capitalize on what the lesser luminary is offering, the one reflecting the sun's light. Now, for someone who might interject and say, that's pretty big talk there, Guy, for you to say that you represent the lesser luminary of the fourth day of creation. No, it's not. In fact, it's the furthest from that. First, I'm not saying it. God is. He said it overtly. That discussion of the greater and lesser luminary, and the repeat of greater and lesser luminary 3 times in that context, and the explanation of it as a sign for the Moed, and we're talking about that very thing, the Moed, Pesach, Matzah, and Makodim, which Dode fulfilled, Shabuah and Teruah, which I will fulfill, and Kippurim and Sukkah, which we collectively fulfill. It makes absolute perfect sense, and it's what God had to say. Whether or not you want to agree with it, whether you want to consider it, whether you want to deal with it, I suspect will have all to do with your attitude and whether or not you are religious as opposed to open-minded and thoughtful. But it's God's claim. And
Didn't
God
he also say that the lesser luminary is going to live forever?
Yeah, he did.
And the moon can't last forever.
That is correct. Yeah, he's eternal in the heavens. He's eternal in association with Dode. Now, the second reason that this is not braggadocious is that one should consider the difference between the sun and the moon. The moon isn't just 400 times smaller than the sun. The moon cannot produce light. The sun has this powerful big engine that produces, through nuclear fusion, enormous amounts of warmth and radiant energy and light. All the moon does is reflect it. And so you've got Dode as the source of light. The moon simply is to reflect it. Now, that's either a big deal or no deal at all, depending upon your frame of reference. If you want to know who Dode was and what he said and what God said about him, then someone being positioned to reflect his brilliance is essential to your relationship with God and salvation. So that's a big deal. If you want to look at it the other way, the moon is so insignificant by comparison to the sun, and the sun in this situation, being the greater luminary, is simply a man, then you might say that something essentially insignificant by comparison to a man is a whole lot of nothing. And I'm quite comfortable with that. The less responsibility I have and the more Dode has, I think it works out really well for me. But, you can look at it either way. I don't have a problem with that. But when God is speaking of his beloved son, he names Dode throughout this Mizmor, the Messiah as the Son of God, as our Savior, as the chosen one. For him to say that the throne of Dode, his position of honor, is eternal, is simply reaffirming what he has said elsewhere. For example, in my favorite prophecy, which would be 2 Samuel 7. But for God to say something as, it seems like almost over the top, doesn't it? His position of authority is going to be akin to the sun in my presence. Do you think that it's going to be so brilliant that we're going to see Dode's seat of honor, which, by the way, you know what Dode's throne is?
The Kapporah, the mercy seat.
Yeah, it's Kapporah. It's the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. That is Dode's throne. Is God saying that I'm replacing the sun, because 2 suns would be a little much for us, and since Dode's coming to Earth for 1,000 years, having something as brilliant as the sun on Earth might just be a little overkill. Just saying. So might this be symbolic language?
I would think so.
I would think so. Can God use symbolic language? Absolutely. And by the way, can he say that, just as the sun provides light and warmth and energy and is the basis for life on this planet and its ability to grow, can God equate the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant and his beloved son's Dode's role in contributing to it? That source of illumination and light and energy, source of enabling us, equipping us, empowering us, sure. And in that light, it's not over the top at all. But when he says that it's Dode's authority and position of power that's going to be as brilliant as the sun, and then he equates that to the moon, what he's saying is that in the official capacity of Dode, the one reflecting his life, which would be the herald, Bashar herald, is forever linked to him, is affirmed. We know who he is. He is appointed, he is prepared, he is trusted, he is put in place, kun, forever, serving Dode in this official capacity. That's what he's saying. The lesser luminary serves the greater luminary in the capacity of helping to shepherd God's people, educate them, lead them, nourish them, protect them. All the things that a perfect leader would do, Dode does. And because Dode is the ideal leader following in his father's footsteps, Yahweh, he will delegate. Yahweh does everything he possibly can through people. Now, just as Dode is the best and God has to work through people that are sometimes a little old and wrinkly and disheveled, Dode's going to do the same thing. That'll be the plan. It was the plan. It is the plan. So the moon's a little cratered. It's a little dented for all the hits it's taken over time.
It's been bashed quite a bit lately.
Yeah. So, but that's God's plan forevermore. It's serving as an enduring, reliable, and truthful, very dependable restoring witness. Ed, source of enduring testimony. And that's the role. That's my job. And without me doing that job, now telling you here that Yahweh is all in because he has afforded me in this role the seven spirits of Yahweh to get this done. And he's given me now already 24 years to get to this point so that I can talk to you about these things and understand them and share this understanding with you, that God is all in. And he's all in now forevermore with this plan of these two individuals working together on behalf of this remnant of his people that are entering the millennial celebration of Sukkah, that he states it right here. These are my guys. This is what we're doing together. This is the relationship to one another, and it is forevermore. Now, I would tell you that there's another indication of this. Well, there's not just another. There are scores and scores and scores of them. But the one that's near and dearest to me now happens to be the most entertaining prophetic revelation of all time, and it is in 2 Samuel 6. It's the preamble to my favorite prophecy ever, the one that brought us together, first one I translated 24 years ago. It's the precursor to 2 Samuel 7 because it's 2 Samuel 6. And in it, our king has a glitch in his get-along. He is a couple of cogs short on the wagon, and he makes a real mistake. God shows something pursuant to the bull, repositioning the Ark of the Covenant, that is extremely important relative to what's going to happen, as the bull is responsible for positioning the Ark of the Covenant such that when Dode returns, it's ready and positioned for him to anoint. And God was showing that in the story that is presented in 2 Samuel 6. And a fella got in the way. And he messed up the story. And Dode decided to side with the fellow that interfered. And he got mad at God. Said, God, you have no right to do that. And he just gave up. He just says, then I'm not going to move the ark. That's just all there is to it. And he says, I have no idea how the ark's going to get to me. And it was get to him because he's the one that has to anoint it when he returns on Yom Kippurim, the 2nd of October in 2033. He says, I have no idea how it's going to get to me. And he walked away from it. Guess what? God says, I got a guy. That guy's name is Obed-Edom. Obed is one doing the work. And Edom is the descendants of Esau. And what we have here is essentially, if you were to look at the root of each of these words, it's the bloody red man of the earth who serves to reconcile the fractured family. That's what Obed-Edom means. And it is particularly poignant because when Jacob had two sons, the firstborn of his sons was Esau, not Jacob. And his wife tricked him so that he gave his blessing to Jacob and not to Esau. Esau was robbed of his blessing, of his birthright, of his inheritance. And he didn't take it well. Obviously, he didn't take it well. And he did some things that he shouldn't have done. And he went off and he married Ishmael's daughter, who was daughters outside of the covenant. And God got distraught with him. But the very fact is, the birthright was his. And Esau is every much as much Israel as is Jacob. But when we find that it's Obed-Edom that is the one working with Dode, because when Dode walked away from the Ark of the Covenant, it was Obed-Edom that took responsibility for it. And we're going to consider a little bit more of that in just a second. But the very fact is that by having it be a man who is named after Esau, what it means is that the fractured family is going to be whole again. And that's a big deal. That's what's going to happen on Teruah in 2033. Now, when the Ark of the Covenant came under Obed-Edom's care, the first thing that we find out is that it was Obed-Edom from Gath, which means winepress. And the moment you see a man, Obed, doing the work on behalf of Edom from Gath, the winepress, alarm should just go off in your head. It just say, because the most uncontemplated prophecy ever written, in terms of this is a really big deal in the midst of a really important prophet at an exceedingly important time that nobody even bothers to consider. In the 66th or 63rd chapter of Yeshaya, Isaiah, the great prophet relays the very words of Yahweh himself when he is conveying that a man will come forth from Edom and he will save many, and that he will be the first to go back into that Gath wine vat with the great prophet Yeshaya, who told this story to us, such that they will collaborate, that he will serve as the final Zeroah, and that he will save many. All of the remnant of Yisrael that comes either by call or by chariot on Teruah in year 6000 September 23rd and 24th of 2033. This final remnant, and Goyim as well, who will be purged such that they can enter the 1,000-year celebration of Sukkah, such that they can witness Dode and Yahweh's return on Kippurim. 100% of them will be saved by the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, this Bokar bull, whose name is Obed-Edom. This is Dode's partner. And that partnership was presented very vividly in the 6th chapter of 2 Samuel. Because not only did God commend Obed-Edom for what he did on behalf of the Ark of the Covenant, and recognition that Obed-Edom would have been associated with that bull that brought that ark into his home, because that's how it was being pulled. And that he not only commended and blessed and benefited and extolled Obed-Edom and his family, but everybody who worked with him. Now, if you were part of this covenant family and you were engaged in the work of the covenant, then you need to know that God said, I'm taking care of you. I know who you are, and I'm extolling you. I'm lifting you up in praise. And ultimately, God used the Hotpael stem to tell Dode in no uncertain terms, hey, pal, son, you got it wrong. Let me explain to you what was going on. Let me explain to you who this Obed-Edom is, and the fact that he is the one in the end that's going to bring the Ark of the Covenant to you so that you can anoint it and we can celebrate the day of reconciliations upon your return in 2033, 3,000 years from now. That's the story that I'm telling. And that's why the bull was pulling the Ark of the Covenant. And that's why it's Obed-Edom, this man from Edom. He's your partner. He's your associate. And that's why in that same text, we find that he is the Neged. The Neged is not the king. It's the prince who serves on behalf of the king. It's the one who is authorized on behalf of the sovereign. And that's his role. He is the moon to the sun. That's what God just told us in this story. Do you care? I do. I like these stories. I like it when God requires us to think. You have to know before you can put these pieces together. Then you've got to have the desire to make the connections to understand. And when you do, you can see the future exactly as it will play out. If you're listening to this program, you are listening to the lesser luminary reflect the greater luminary's light as it was sung by the creator of the universe, Yahweh, about his beloved son. So God says in the humblest of ways, pause now and contemplate what you have just heard. Mizmor, Psalm 89:37. It's hard to imagine something any more spectacular. So with these words, we in 89:37, we can, of course, make the proper connections to Bereshith, Genesis 1:14 through 18, so that we come to better understand both references to the sun and to the moon, pursuant to the Moedim. And as an added bonus, I suspect that we can finally clear up one of the more intriguing references in the creation account, while at the same time developing an appreciation for the reference to the moon here in Dode's song. This seems to be saying that the moon, representing an individual like the sun, will affirm and establish this profoundly important revelation regarding Dode. And in so doing, the moon, who is likened to Dode, will be reflecting the sun's light and serving with him forevermore. And that's similar to the Earth's satellite mirroring the sun's brilliance when our star is otherwise seen in the darkness of night. This is why the individual being associated with Dode, albeit less luminous, is called an enduring, reliable, valid, verifiable, confident, loyal witness, pursuant to this restoring testimony. So now, turning the hands of time back to creation, in Bereshith Genesis, we find the interplay between the sun and the moon, called the greater and lesser luminaries. And since this is one of the most profoundly important subtleties ever shared, I'll share it with you now. God said, there will be lights as luminaries. There'll be Me'or, sources of illumination. Me'or is a compound of two words, ma, to ponder the implications of, or light. There will be two luminaries for you to ponder the implications of their illumination in the expanse, within the spreading out of matter, space, and time of the heavens. To understand the separation between, to divide and distinguish, to discern that which it means to be set apart, to ascertain the means towards inclusion or the cause of expulsion, to appreciate how to be part of or disassociated from the time of light. Hayom, the reckoning of time when there is light, as it is distinct from Bayan, as it is differentiated from the darkness of the night, the period of substantially diminished light, of a waning illumination. They will exist as symbols and signs, la'oth, as a means to convey information, illustrations, if you will, and proof, which make something more clearly known, especially when evaluating recompense or reward. From Uth, a means to be seen agreeing and providing consent. And for the appointed meeting times for the restoring witness, wa la moed, concerning the designated periods which have been determined for a specific purpose authorized by the authority directly associated with the mikre. From Mo, this pertains to Ed, the eternal testimony of the restoring witness, and potentially Ya'ad, to meet on an appointed schedule, as well as for days, the reckoning of time when there is light, and for years, Washana, the complete cycle of the seasons, a solar year, which is a measure of an age and a renewal of life. Barashith 1:14. Therefore, they will exist as luminaries to ponder the implications of enlightenment in the expanse, in the spreading out of time, matter, and space, in the spiritual realm, to provide illumination and enlightenment for all the earth and the material realm. And therefore, it continued to exist like this thereafter, based upon everything that preceded this. Barashith 1:15. God acted and engaged to a point for this particular task, to accomplish this work, to fulfill this mission. Both of these substantial and empowering, important and influential sources of illumination. Ha-ma'ar, ha-godal. Oh my goodness. Gadol. Gadol is the single most commonly referenced adjective describing Dod's character. When describing Dod's mind, Yahweh uses Sadak, right. When defining his character, he uses Gadol. Gadol and Gabor are cognates. It speaks of strength, resolve, influence, power, authority, being substantial, being important, of battling to the very end. To a lesser degree, but yet unequivocally, God also uses Gadol to speak of the lesser luminary, because he has been assigned a job that heretofore has been impossible. So these two, substantial and empowering, important and influential sources of illumination. When God called both of them Ha-Gadol, it means that even as I try to have fun with the fact that the moon is infinitesimal compared to the sun, both in size and also in what it can produce. It just simply reflects the sun's light. Then God says, okay, kid, that's cute and all. And, I appreciate the humor, but that's not God's point of view. God's point of view is that both of these luminaries are distinguished. They're both influential. They're both empowering. They're both substantial. They're both courageous. They're both resolved to get the job done. Now, that said, the greater, more distinguished, and ultimately empowering Eth Ha-Gadol luminary, the most Gadol of all men, which would be Dowd, becomes prominent and clearly known as the influence over Mimshala, governing with illustrative proverbs, painting pictures with words. Who wrote the proverbs, which are mashal word pictures?
Dowd.
Oh, there you go. Well, there's a clue, isn't it?
Lots of word pictures.
Yeah.
You can't connect the dots without the pictures.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Who was the person that introduced the choder? It was Dowd in the 14th
Dowd,
mashal,
the
wasn't it?
14th,
Word
yeah.
picture. Seems like they have a relationship, doesn't it? The ultimately empowered luminary becoming prominent and clearly known as the influence, the one who will govern with illustrative proverbs, painting word pictures, the illuminated during the illuminated time, during the day. What was the time of illumination? It was that 1,000 years between the time that Yahweh revealed how he created the universe in Bereshith 1, how he and why he created Eden, and what happened there that we're the first to actually share with you in a meaningful way. And then why the flood was necessary, because humanity became way too corrupt and embittered for God to even endure us. Followed by the story of how God picked a man on his way out of Babel and articulated the narrative, which included the terms and conditions and the benefits of the covenant that would finally lead us back to Eden. And how he and his sons weren't always the most compliant. They weren't always the ideal children, were they?
No.
And how they ultimately got themselves and turned into slaves in Egypt. And God says, I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to perpetrate genocide on my people. And he delivered them kicking and screaming where they were malcreants. They were belligerent. They were obnoxious. But that whole story was revealed for the first time for us to know in 1447 BCE. 1,000 years later, the last of the prophets, in 447 BCE, was Malachi, a man named Messenger. That was the time of enlightenment. Dowd ended his first of 3 lives in 994 BCE, 92, 994 BCE. 4 years prior to year 3000, which would be right in the middle of this time of enlightenment, wouldn't it? So Dowd is the midst of the time of enlightenment. He's after the Torah, after the book of Yosha, after the book of Shaphat, Judges, after the profoundly important books and even living during the important books of Shamuel and Malachim, Kings. And then all of his wonderful psalms, his Mizmor, and his Mashal, Proverbs. And from that time on, you have some great prophets: Hosea, Yirmiah, Zechariah, Yashaya, Yoel, Malachi, all telling us this story of what God has done and will do, and how he is ultimately going to move forward. And so he is the one who became known as the greater influence over the illuminated time. And since Malachi in 447 BCE, nothing from God. The time of darkness. That's when the moon had to come to bear the sun's light, because we have been in a time of darkness, and we still are, and it's going to get darker still. And with the lesser, the younger, and more recent Eth Ha-Katan luminary. That's why it refers to me when we have our private chats, young man. Yes, I'm a few thousand years younger than Dode. I hope I look it. I am in God's story, not by choice, but by God's direction, his appointment. This lesser, younger, and more recent Katan luminary, source of enlightenment, becoming known for leading through illustrative words as a prominent influence. You know, there's only one person who wrote more than did Moshe and Yashaya as a prophet. You know who that one person was as a prophet who, during that period of enlightenment, wrote more words than did Moshe or Yashaya?
That's Dode.
Dode. There's only one man named in God's story that has written more than Moshe, Yashaya, and Dode combined.
That would be his herald.
That would be his herald. He is a man of illustrative words. He is a man of prominent and empowering words. He's a man of influential words. Those words can be read at yada.com in the series of books called Yada Yahweh, to know Yahweh. And the crowning achievement of those books are called Coming Home, which is a return to our King, Dode. Becoming known for this lesser luminary, the younger one, the more recent one, leading through illustrative words and offering a prominent influence during the night when the light is not known, during the period of darkness, where there is a scarcity of light, a period of ignorance as a result of failing to be observant. In conjunction with the heavenly powers. Barashith 1:16. Such a shame that people didn't have any understanding of this, but I'm not positive that in fact, I'm actually quite sure. It would not have been possible to understand the story of the greater and lesser luminary. Why would God go into such length? We've just talked about the 14th and the 15th and the 16th. There's still the 17th and 18th verses where God is talking about these greater and lesser luminaries that he has positioned for the Moed and to be signs for all of this. And he's still talking about them. And yet, for all of this time, no one understood it. I mean, this is one of those things where you have to have a Dode comes to daddy meeting. You know, he fell off he didn't fall off the wagon, but he thought he saw a man killed for interfering with God's story on the movement, on having the bull move the Ark of the Covenant to the city of Dode. And Daddy had to come and say, son, let me explain this to you so that you get it right, because you're just dead wrong right at the moment. I got a guy, and this is what's going to happen. Let me take you back to the story of the greater and lesser luminary. Let me take you back to the story that I shared in Numbers 15. You recall the story of the bull and the ram and the goat and what they were all going to achieve and how they were going to work together? Did you not pay any attention when I told you the story in Numbers 11 after Moshe had his meltdown? And I said, there's a couple of prophets. I got a couple of guys, and those guys are going to reveal what needs to be known. And the first one was El Dode, the Almighty's Dode. Did you not figure that out? And there was a second guy, and his name was my Dode. That is like your Dode, Dode's guy. Why'd you miss this stuff, son? Okay, now you got the picture? You're ready to go? Oh, by the way, that guy's name? Obed-Edom. Yeah, you're 300 years after your first life here. I'm going to reveal through Yashayah exactly who that guy is and what role he plays, because you're going to need to anoint the Ark of the Covenant when you return as king, and somebody's got to get it in the right spot. And I work through people.
And the bull delivers the ark.
He does. That's exactly the story. So you missed that part, son.
Oops.
Now,
Sorry.
Yeah, oops.
Sorry, Dad.
Sorry, Dad. Okay, let's go out and party. Now I got it. Let's go out and party. And boy, did he ever. He even put on the priestly ephod to verify something that I concluded when studying Zechariah 4, which is that the high priest, the role of the high priest upon Kippurim, where the mercy seat, the Kipporeth, the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, must be anointed with the blood of a bull for there to be reconciliation and for the people to approach God, that the one doing that is going to be Dode. And so what do we see Dode dressed as when he is following the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, which is where it must be placed?
He's dressed as the high priest.
He's dressed as the high priest.
Don't forget that turban.
High priest from here on up.
Yep.
Happy son from there on down. Oh boy, from there on down. That's another story. We'll get to that story soon enough. God's got a sense of humor, as does the king. Turns out, king's more sarcastic than Eliah. All right, so this whole purpose of the lesser luminary, the more recent one, is to provide enlightenment for all of the land and all of the earth during this time of darkness. Barishith 1:17. Well, actually, the whole thing for 1:17, I pushed my teleprompter down a little prematurely. So let me go back to the top of this. That was the end of it. We're running a professional outfit here, aren't we? The Almighty, Wa Elohim, caused them to be placed there for this purpose. Nathan Ethem. Actually, it doesn't say so much as he caused them. You know what the verb Nathan is in Hebrew? It's one of the most powerful of all Hebrew terms. As a matter of fact, it's presented in Yashayah, the 6th chapter of Yashayah, ninth chapter of Yashayah, 9:6, when speaking of the son who was Nathan. Given. It means to give. So the Almighty is saying that he caused the lesser and luminaries to be a gift. He's offering them. He bestowed them, he assigned them for this opportunity and task as a gift in the expanse of the heavens, to provide light and enlightenment, to be illuminating for the land and for the earth. Therefore, they will function as proverbs, governing with memorable and illustrative words. Mashal. They will lead by painting pictures with words. Now, Dode was the ultimate wordsmith. His proverbs are brilliant from that point of view, but I think the lyrics of his songs, the Mizmor, are even greater. Just a great wordsmith. And he was the lyricist that Yahweh prefers overall. When we are in Shamaim, when we're celebrating the millennial celebration of Sukkah, the lead singer in Yah's band going to be Dode. He was the ultimate wordsmith. So when God chose a man to reflect the Son, his Son, he chose a man who also loves words. I began this process with a man that taught me to write. I had written millions of business letters and the like prior to the time that I met him. I had taken companies public and written long and detailed business plans. I mean, certainly could write, but there's a difference in writing a business plan and composing a story. There's just a different style of writing. And after 9/11, after Yahweh had asked me to do this project for him, even before that, as we were confronted with a Business Week article, a cover story on me, that got really nothing right other than the spelling of my name. Everything else was wrong. And because everything else was wrong, and it was a national periodical, Business Week, and it had maligned really everything that we had done and all the team that I had assembled had done. And we built a company that was better than Amazon before Amazon was doing much of anything but selling books through a bookseller that they eventually put out of business. He said, we can tell this story. And he says, my favorite story happens to be Moby Dick. And he says, I love Moby Dick because of the way it's written. It's one of the very few books that has a non-omniscient narrator. The narrator is a character in the story. Call me Ishmael. And Ishmael, of all names, of course, is the narrator of the story of the white whale and of Moby Dick. And he is just a participant and a minor character at that in the story. And so it's being told from his perspective. And it's such an interesting way to bring people into the story. And he says, we could tell the story of this company that we built. We'll call it In the Company. Actually, that was my name. But they said we could tell this story from the perspective of one of the first employees you hired, which is me, he said. This fellow, he's passed away since a couple of years ago. Really nice man. And so that's where I learned to write, because we told the story like Moby Dick, and you have to learn to write in dialogue. Writing credible dialogue, particularly of a true story, it's a real challenge, because that dialogue has to be credible, and yet you've got to condense everything down so it's in a readable fashion, taking years and condensing them down to a few hours of reading. But we did that. And then after that, he started a series on the book of Hosea. And he wanted me to read what he had written thus far in Hosea and he was trying to blend, it's kind of like Messianic Judaism, where you blend the Torah and the New Testament together to create it's kind of what they would call now Hebrew roots movement or Messianic Judaism, where you try to take two ill-fitting things and bring them together. Well, he asked me to read it. And what I found is that I didn't like the translations that he was using. He was using primarily the New Living Translation. And I found it to be really sloppy. It's essentially a paraphrase. And so I started looking up the meaning of every word that he was rendering and found it to be quite different than it was in that text. And I found it also to have things be as different as the New Testament and the book of Hosea, juxtaposed. So rather than reading it and giving him a few suggestions, I completely wrote a new series. I said, here, I'm going to give you yours back because I can't edit this. But I would encourage you to call it Future History, because I think that's a great title for, since you're trying to present prophecy, why don't you present it as Future History? It's a really an interesting title. And then what is now the Azab volume of the Yada Yahweh series is the book that I wrote based upon me doing my first translations ever, and they were in the book of Hosea. Translated the entire book from beginning to end. Learned some profound insights that no one had ever conceived before, and that's what set me on my way. And my good friend's response, because he still wanted to cling to Paul and to Christianity, was, and I was saying, God does not want us to be religious. And he says, you've made a religion of words.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes, I am bound, because religion is based upon the Latin word religere, which is they call them the things that keep our bones together.
Cartilage,
and it's from
ligaments.
Ligaments. That's it. Ligaments. Say, maybe I'm not in love with all words. But you got to have a Moshe moment. If you don't have a Moshe moment, then you're not suited for this job. So anyway, ligaments, it's to bind. So religion means to rebind. And so if you're going to say, I'm trying to rebind humankind to Yahweh through words. So I said, yeah, this is a great compliment. I'm happy with that. But this is exactly this idea that therefore they will function as proverbs, that these two fellas are going to be the two most verbose fellas ever as it relates to me. Number one and number two in verbosity. They are going to speak and they're going to communicate memorably. They're going to use illustrative sayings. They're going to paint word pictures in the day and during this time of darkness, providing a contrast to appreciate the difference between the light and comprehend being separated via the darkness, the confusion. It essentially is saying that the lesser luminary is going to serve as the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, that's going to point to the tree of lives, which is that source of life, which is the greater luminary or the sun. And God saw that indeed this was very good. It was useful, it was agreeable, it was valuable, it was appropriate, it was productive, it was beneficial. I got a couple of guys. These are my guys. Bereshith, in the beginning, Genesis 1:18. Wow. Just wow. I mean, when God tells a story and you get to celebrate being the first person, I'm sure that Dode, when God says, listen, I'm going to explain what's happening here, I'm sure God explained it to Dode. And I'm sure that in Shamaim, all the guys that have ever spoken for Yahweh get this story. But I'm just talking about in the here and now, on this rock we call Earth, being the first person to understand that story. And to be able to bring it to you and share it with you with this passion and enthusiasm, recognizing that it is the essence of life for you to benefit from the lesser luminary reflecting the greater luminary's light so that you can live forever, so that you can be purged of your religious guilt and be part of the covenant family and be enriched and empowered by God, and recognize that it is Dode who is God's son. Dode is the Messiah. He is the chosen one. He is the former and returning king, and that he is our savior for having fulfilled Pesach Matzon Bekurim. It's the greatest discovery in human history, and it was brought to light by the lesser luminary reflecting what the greater luminary had accomplished. And if that's not worth the price of admission, then perhaps you just don't belong in the show. I thank you for listening.